The space station haven floated in the quiet darkness between distant stars. Inside its long silver halls, machines hummed softly and lights glowed in neat lines along the walls. Most of the crew had gone to their quarters for the night, leaving, the station calm and silent. Only a few workers stayed awake, keeping watch over the systems that kept everyone safe. Mark, a human technician, was one of those workers. He sat at a console in the control room, checking energy levels and life support readings. His job was not difficult tonight. Everything was running smoothly. The screens in front of him showed numbers that stayed steady. There were no warnings, no strange signals, and no sudden noises from the machinery. Mark leaned back in his chair, letting his eyes wander toward the large window on the far side of the room. Beyond the thick glass stretched the endless black of space. Stars shone brightly, scattered like tiny sparks across the dark. Some blinked faintly, others glowed with a steady light. The view was peaceful, and Mark often found himself staring at it during quiet shifts. But tonight, the view was different. Someone was standing at the observation deck near the window, a tall, slender figure dressed in a soft blue uniform. Her hair was long and silver, flowing down her back like a stream of light. She stood very still, her hands resting lightly on the railing, her gaze fixed on the stars. Mark knew who she was. Her name was Nira, an alien woman from the distant world of Vera. She had joined the station a few weeks ago as part of a cultural and scientific exchange program. The crew had been curious about her at first. Nira's people looked similar to humans, but had small differences that made them unique. Her skin had a faint shimmer under the station lights, and her deep violet eyes seemed to hold a quiet, endless depth. Mark had spoken to her only once before, during a quick introduction. She had been polite but reserved. Since then, she mostly worked alone, spending long hours in the research labs or at the observation deck. He often noticed her there, when he passed by, always watching the stars as if searching for something far away. Tonight, he found himself watching her again. Something about her calm presence made him curious. She did not fidget, she did not seem restless, and she did not look tired, even after hours of standing in one place. It was as if the stars themselves were speaking to her in a language only she could understand. Mark tried to focus back on his work, but his eyes kept drifting toward her. He wondered what she was thinking. Was she remembering her home? Was she studying the star maps in her mind? Or was she simply enjoying the silence? The thought that she might notice him staring crossed his mind, but he told himself it was harmless, curiosity. After all, she was an alien guest on the station. It was natural to want to understand her better. The minutes passed quietly. The steady hum of the station filled the room. Mark's console continued to show perfect readings. His gaze returned to Nira again and again, drawn by something he could not name. Then, without warning, Nira turned her head. Her violet eyes met his. For a brief moment, Mark froze. He had been caught. "You have been staring at me for hours," she said. Her voice was soft but clear, carrying a strange musical tone that made the words feel gentle rather than accusing. There was no anger in her eyes, only calm curiosity. Mark felt a warm rush of embarrassment. He quickly looked away, searching for an excuse. I'm sorry," he said, his voice awkward. "I was just wondering what you were looking at. You seem very focused." Nira tilted her head slightly, studying him as if she were trying to read his thoughts. "I am watching the patterns in the stars," she said. "Few humans do this for long. Most glance and move away." Mark gave a small, uneasy smile. "I guess I've always liked looking at the stars, but I've never seen anyone watch them as carefully as you." Nira's gaze softened. "On my world, the stars are our oldest teachers. We learn their movements from a young age. They guide our journeys, Tell us when the seasons will change, and remind us where we come from. Here, far from home, they are my connection to my people. Mark found himself leaning forward slightly, interested in her words. So you can read them like a map? She nodded. In a way. Each star, each movement, each small change in the light, they are all part of a greater pattern. If you understand the pattern, you can find your way anywhere in the galaxy, Mark imagined her world under 3 suns, with skies brighter than anything he had seen on Earth. He wondered what it must be like to grow up knowing the stars not as faraway lights, but as living guides. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that allowed thoughts to settle and drift like the stars themselves. Finally, Nira turned her gaze back to the window. "Do you wish to see what I see?" she asked. Mark hesitated. "I think so," he said. She raised a hand, pointing toward a cluster of stars far to the left of the window. "Those 3 there. Do you see them?" "Yes," he said. "They are called the triad in my language. Their paths cross once every 500 cycles. When they do, they create a shift in the light that can be seen even from here. This will happen soon. I am waiting for it." Mark looked more closely. The 3 stars seemed ordinary to him. He could not imagine how their light would change, but he trusted her words. "You have great patience," he said quietly. Nira gave the smallest smile. "Patience is easy when you love what you are watching." Mark felt something stir inside him. He did not know if it was admiration, curiosity, or something deeper. All he knew was that he wanted to understand her world, her thoughts, and the way she saw the universe. They stood in silence again. The stars shone on, ancient and unchanged, yet somehow alive in the quiet between them. For the rest of his shift, Mark found himself less concerned with the numbers on his console and more drawn to the view outside and to the alien woman who seemed to belong to it more than anyone else on the station. The next day on the space station, Haven began like most others. The soft white lights of the corridors brightened slowly to mark the morning cycle. Crew members walked through the halls, some heading toward the cafeteria, others to their workstations. Mark had just finished his breakfast and was walking toward the control room for his shift. As he passed the observation deck, he noticed Nira standing at the window again. She wore the same calm expression he had seen the night before. The stars stretched across the dark sky outside, and her violet eyes seemed to follow their hidden paths. Mark slowed his steps. He thought about how she had spoken to him last night. Her words had been simple but stayed in his mind. "You have been staring at me for hours." She had not sounded annoyed. She had sounded curious, as if she wanted to understand him as much as he wanted to understand her. He decided to walk toward her. His shift had not yet started, and he wanted to continue their conversation from last night. "Good morning," he said softly as he reached the railing beside her. Nira turned her head slightly and gave a small nod. "Good morning, Mark." She spoke his name slowly, as if testing its shape. Her voice carried the same musical tone he remembered. "I did not mean to disturb you yesterday," Mark said. "I just did not expect you to notice me watching." Nira kept her gaze on the stars. "I notice more than you think," she replied. "But I do not always speak of it." Mark felt a small rush of embarrassment again. "I was curious," he said. "You looked so focused. I wondered what you were seeing." Nira glanced at him now. Her violet eyes were calm but searching. "Why were you watching me?" she asked. "Was it my work you were curious about? Or was it something else?" Mark hesitated. The question caught him by surprise. He had not prepared an answer, and he could not tell her the truth. Not yet. "I think it was both," he said slowly. "Your work is unlike anything I have seen. And you seem different from the others here." Different in what way? She asked. Mark thought carefully. You seem peaceful. Most of us rush from one task to another, but you take time to watch. You look at the stars as if they are friends. Neera's expression softened. On my world, the stars are part of our lives. We speak of them as living things. Here, I am far from home. The stars are my connection to what I know best. Mark nodded. He remembered how she had pointed out the 3 stars last night, the triad, she had called them. You told me they meet every 500 cycles, he said. Is that soon? Yes, Neera replied. Very soon. It is why I'm here so often. I want to see it happen from this place. It is rare to watch such an event from outside my home system. Mark leaned against the railing beside her. And when it happens, what will it look like? She was quiet for a moment before answering. To most eyes, it will be only a small change in light, but to those who understand, it is a moment of harmony in the sky. It is a sign that even distant things can meet again after long separation. Mark thought about her words. There was something almost poetic about them. He wondered if she was speaking only of stars, or if there was a deeper meaning hidden there. Before he could ask, a soft tone came from the station's intercom. It was a reminder for crew members to report to their shifts. Mark straightened. I should go, he said. Maybe later you can show me more of what you see. Neera gave a small nod. Perhaps, but you must be willing to watch for longer than most humans can. Mark smiled faintly. I think I can do that. Later that day, Mark returned to his duties in the control room. His hands worked on the panels, but his mind kept drifting back to Neera's question. Why were you watching me? He had given her part of the truth, but not all. He had not told her about the quiet pull he felt toward her, the way his thoughts seemed to circle back to her without reason. In the days that followed, Mark found himself passing the observation deck more often. Sometimes Neera was there, and sometimes she was not. When she was there, she always greeted him with a small nod or a faint smile. They began to speak more often, usually in short conversations about the stars, her research, or the life she had left behind on Vera. He learned that Vera's skies were bright with 3 suns, and that her people traveled mostly by reading the movements of stars rather than using machines. She told him about long journeys across the deserts of her world, guided only by the patterns of light above. She described the great gatherings her people held when certain constellations appeared, marking the change of seasons. Mark shared small pieces of his own life as well. The green hills near his childhood home, the small telescope his father had given him when he was young, and how he used to lie on the roof at night trying to name the constellations. The more they talked, the easier it became for Mark to be near her. She listened with quiet attention, never rushing him. He noticed she rarely spoke about herself unless asked, as if much of her life was a private world she carried inside. One evening, as Mark finished his shift, he saw her again at the observation deck. The room was dim except for the soft light from the stars outside. Neera was leaning on the railing, her gaze fixed on a familiar cluster, the triad. They are getting closer, she said without turning. Mark stepped beside her. When will they meet? Soon, she replied. Perhaps within the next few nights. He nodded. I want to be here when it happens. Her violet eyes turned toward him, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Then she gave a small smile. Then you will have to keep watching. Mark felt a quiet warmth in her words. It was not a command, not even a request. It was something softer, an invitation to remain by her side in the silent company of the stars. The station haven moved silently through the dark space, its silver surface reflecting the faint glow of distant suns. Inside, the crew went about their daily routines. The sound of quiet footsteps, soft voices, and humming machines filled the air. Life on the station often felt the same each day, but for Mark, something was changing. He had begun spending more time near the observation deck. Whenever his work allowed, he found himself walking the long corridor that led to the wide viewing window. It was there that he often found Nira, standing with the same quiet grace, her eyes fixed on the stars. One day, as Mark approached, he saw that she was working on a small device. It projected a faint image of the star field onto a glass panel she held in her hands. Her long silver hair caught the light, and her focused expression made her seem almost like part of the stars themselves. "Good morning," Mark said as he stepped closer. Nira glanced at him briefly and gave a small nod. "Good morning, Mark." "What are you working on?" he asked, leaning slightly toward the glowing panel. "This is a portable star chart," she explained. "It is linked to the station's sensors. It helps me track small changes in the positions of certain stars." Mark looked at the shimmering points of light on the panel. They seemed to match the view outside the window. "So you're making your own map?" Nira tilted her head slightly. "In a way, but this map is alive. It changes every moment. It shows the movements as they happen." Mark's eyes followed the tiny glowing dots. "How can you read them so easily?" "I have been reading the stars since I was a child," Nira said. "On Veera, it is part of our life. We begin learning when we are young, and by the time we are grown, we can travel across the world without losing our way." Mark leaned against the railing. "That sounds like an amazing skill. I don't think I could ever do it." Nira looked at him thoughtfully. "You could, if you wanted to, but you would need patience, and patience is rare among your people." Mark gave a small smile. "You might be right about that." She set the panel aside and turned fully toward the large window. "The triad is almost ready to meet," she said. "I am watching for the first signs. When they align, I will record the event. It will be a gift for my people." "A gift?" Mark asked. "Yes," she replied. "When I return home, I will bring them this record. It will be proof that even far from Veera, our traditions still live." Mark imagined her bringing the recording to her people, perhaps showing it to elders who remembered past alignments. He could picture her standing among them, telling the story of how she watched the stars from a human station far away. "Do you miss your home?" he asked quietly. Nira's gaze stayed on the stars. "Every day," she said. "But I knew I would be far from it when I chose this journey. My people believe that learning from others is a way of honoring the stars, so I am here. Learning from you, as you may learn from me." Mark thought about her words. "What have you learned from us so far?" Nira gave a faint smile. "You rush through life as if you are racing against time. But you also create beauty in small things, music, stories, art. That is something I admire." Mark was curious. "You like music?" "Yes," Nira said. "It is strange to me, yet it speaks to something inside. Your songs do not guide you through the desert or show you the way to the mountains, but they guide your feelings. I find that interesting." Mark thought for a moment, then said, "I could bring you some music. I have a small player in my quarters." She looked at him. "You would share it?" "Of course," Mark said. "Maybe you can tell me what you think of it." Later that evening, Mark returned with a small device. He handed it to Nira in the quiet of the observation deck. She placed the earpieces in, and a gentle melody began to play. Mark had chosen a simple tune, soft and slow, like the quiet movement of water. Nira closed her eyes as she listened. She stood very still, letting the notes drift through her. After a while, she opened her eyes again. "It feels like looking at the stars," she said softly. Mark smiled. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. From that day, music became part of their time together. Sometimes Mark would bring her different songs, and she would describe them in her own way. Some sounded like wind over sand, others like the bright light of morning. In return, Neera began teaching him how to read the stars. She showed him how to notice the smallest changes in their positions, how to watch the way their light shifted over time. She pointed out shapes and patterns he had never seen before. Slowly, Mark began to see the sky not just as a collection of distant points, but as a map filled with meaning. One evening, as they stood together, Neera pointed toward a faint cluster far from the triad. "That is called the Lantern Path," she said. "On my world, it is said to light the way for travelers who have lost their way." Mark followed her gaze. "Do you believe that?" Neera's lips curved into a small smile. "I believe it in the way you believe in your stories. It may not be the stars themselves that guide us, but the belief that we are not alone in the dark." Mark thought about her words long after he returned to his quarters. He realized he was learning more from her than he had expected. She was not only showing him the stars, she was teaching him how to see the universe differently. The days passed, and the triad continued its slow approach toward alignment. Each night, Mark joined Neera at the observation deck. They watched, they talked, and sometimes they simply stood, in silence, sharing the same view. Mark felt a growing connection between them. Something quiet but steady, like the movement of the stars. He still could not tell her how he truly felt, but he knew the truth inside himself, and each time Neera spoke of the stars, he listened as if she were telling him more than just a lesson in astronomy. He listened as if she were letting him see a part of her world, and perhaps a part of her heart. The space station Haven was never truly silent, but in the late hours of the evening cycle it felt close to it. The usual sounds of footsteps and conversation faded, leaving only the faint hum of machines. In that quiet time, the observation deck became almost like another world, a place apart from the busy work of the station. Mark found himself drawn there more often than anywhere else. The control room was his duty, but the observation deck had become something different. It was where he felt a calm he could not find in any other part of the station. It was where Neera always seemed to be. That evening, he arrived carrying a small case. Inside it was a music player with new songs he had chosen for her. She was already there, standing at her usual place by the railing, looking out at the stars. "I brought something for you," Mark said softly as he approached. Neera turned her head slightly. "More music?" "Yes," Mark said, placing the device on the railing. "I thought you might like these. They're slower, softer than the others." She took the device, placed the small earpieces in, and pressed play. A gentle sound filled her ears. Slow notes like water dripping into a still pool. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound sink in. "This one feels like a quiet sunrise," she said. Mark smiled. "That's exactly what the composer named it." Neera opened her eyes again. Then they understood the feeling well. They stood together for a while, listening. The music played softly between them, mixing with the silent beauty of the stars beyond the glass. When the song ended, Neera removed the earpieces and placed them back on the device. "You give me more than you know," she said. Mark tilted, his head slightly. "What do you mean?" "My people believe that when someone shares a part of their world, it is a gift that can never be taken back," Neera explained. "You have shared your music, your stories, your time. You have given me pieces of your life." Mark felt a warmth in his chest at her words. "You've given me something too," he said. "You've shown me a way of looking at the stars I never imagined. You've made me see them as alive." Neera's gaze returned to the window. "They are alive in their way. They shape the worlds around them. They give light. They give warmth. Without them, there would be nothing. Mark leaned on the railing beside her. Do you think that's true for people too? That they can be like stars? Yes, Neera said quietly. Some people give light without even knowing it. Her words stayed in Mark's mind long after they were spoken. Over the next few days, they began to share more of themselves. Mark told her about his years on Earth, about the small fishing town where he grew up, and about how he had always wanted to see more of the galaxy. He told her about the night he first saw the Milky Way stretch across the sky and how it had made him feel both small and infinite at the same time. Neera listened without interrupting. She told him about her own journeys, crossing the deserts, of Vera by starlight, standing on the white cliffs that overlooked her world's largest ocean, hearing the sound of 3 suns setting at once. She described it in a way that made Mark feel as though he could see it himself. They began to spend time together outside the observation deck as well. Mark invited her to the small crew lounge to watch a documentary about human space exploration. She invited him to join her in the research lab, where she explained how her people measured time by the rhythm of distant pulsars. One evening, Neera showed Mark a set of intricate star maps she had been working on. Each was drawn by hand with precise lines and symbols. This is how my people see the sky, she explained. Not just points of light, but paths, stories, and history. Mark traced a finger near one of the patterns, careful not to touch the fragile surface. It's beautiful, he said. It is our way of remembering, she replied. When I return home, I will add my journey here to the maps. Mark looked at her. So you'll always remember this place? Yes, she said softly. And perhaps I will remember you as well. The words made something tighten in Mark's chest. He wanted to tell her how much that would mean to him, but he stayed quiet. As the days passed, the triad drew closer to alignment. Mark and Neera spoke of it often. She told him it was a rare and beautiful moment, one that her people would mark with gatherings and quiet reflection. He promised her he would be there when it happened. One night, they stood together, watching the stars without speaking. The triad shone brightly now, its 3 points closer than ever. The rest of the station seemed far away, as if it no longer existed beyond the quiet hum of the observation deck. Mark noticed the way the starlight caught in Neera's hair, the way her eyes seemed to hold the reflection of the entire galaxy. He realized that his feelings for her had grown beyond curiosity or friendship. She had become a part of his thoughts, a constant presence he did not want to lose. But he also knew that saying this aloud might change everything. For now, he kept it inside, letting the quiet bond between them grow naturally. They stood there until the lights in the corridor dimmed for the night cycle. As they turned to leave, Neera glanced at him. You watch the stars differently now, she said. Mark smiled faintly. Maybe I'm starting to see what you see. Neera gave the smallest nod, as if that was exactly what she had hoped for. The bond between them was not built on sudden moments, but on countless small ones. The shared music, the lessons about the stars, the long silences that felt comfortable, rather than empty. Mark began to feel that their connection was something rare, something that could not be forced and could not be found just anywhere. He didn't know what the coming days would bring, but he knew this. He would be by her side when the triad aligned. And maybe when the time was right, he would find the courage to tell her how much she meant to him. For now, the stars continued their slow dance, and Mark was content to watch them, and her, for as long as he could. The days on the space station Haven had settled into a quiet rhythm. Mark's shifts in the control room passed smoothly, and his evenings on the observation deck with Neera had become the best part of his life aboard the station. The triad was almost aligned now, and each night its 3 stars shone brighter, moving closer together in the dark sky. But the calm did not last. It began with a faint warning light on Mark's console one afternoon. He had been checking energy output levels when a small icon started blinking. At first, he thought it was a routine sensor glitch, but when he tapped the display, the numbers shifted and a new reading appeared. The station's long-range sensors had detected a cluster of objects moving toward Haven. He called up the data. The readings showed irregular shapes, not ships but solid masses, large, heavy, moving fast. Control to command, Mark said, into his communicator. "We've got incoming objects, possible debris field." The voice of Commander Raylan came through the speaker. "Copy, control. We're checking. Keep monitoring." Mark zoomed in on the readings. His stomach tightened. The objects were asteroid fragments, likely broken off from a larger body somewhere in the outer belt. Their path was almost a direct line toward the station. Within minutes, the command crew confirmed it. A cluster of asteroids, each varying in size, would pass dangerously close to Haven in less than 2 days. If even one of them hit, it could damage the station's hull or disrupt vital systems. Mark knew what that meant. Sleepless hours ahead, running calculations, adjusting the station's shields, and preparing for emergency procedures. That evening, Mark made his way to the observation deck, hoping to find Nira. She was there, as always, standing by the railing and watching the stars. Her calm presence felt like a relief after the tense day. "Nira," he said quietly. She turned toward him. "You sound troubled." "We've got a problem," Mark said. "A cluster of asteroids is headed this way, big enough to damage the station." Nira's expression remained steady, but he saw the faint narrowing of her eyes. "When will they arrive?" "In less than 2 days." She stepped closer to the window, gazing out at the starfield. "Show me the data." Mark handed her a small data pad with the readings. She studied the figures with quick, practiced eyes. "Your system's predictions are close," she said, "but the movement of such a cluster is not simple. Their paths can change." "That's why we're preparing the shields," Mark said. Nira shook her head slightly. "Shields alone may not be enough. The fragments are coming from multiple angles. You need to predict their true paths, not just their current direction." Mark frowned. "We've got the best tracking software available, but it can't calculate fast enough when there are this many objects." She looked at him steadily. "Then you should let me help." Mark explained the situation to the commander, who at first hesitated. But when Nira described her ability to read the movements of celestial objects with accuracy beyond the station's computers, the commander agreed. That night, Nira joined Mark in the control room. She stood beside the main display, her violet, eyes scanning the data. She moved quickly, adjusting the station's readings, marking predicted points of impact. "You see this fragment here?" she said, pointing to a glowing dot on the screen. "It will not follow this projected line. It will shift here, then here, passing closer to your southern shield array." Mark entered her predictions into the system, and the revised path matched. "Later sensor updates exactly. You're good at this," he said quietly. She glanced at him. "This is what I have done my entire life, read the movement of the stars and the bodies between them." They worked late into the night, charting the approach of each fragment. Mark adjusted shield settings according to her predictions, while Nira identified the ones most likely to pose a danger. Their teamwork was smooth, almost wordless at times. When the station shifted into the night cycle, the observation deck was empty. But Mark and Nira stood there for a moment before heading to rest, outside. The triad glimmered in the distance, drawing closer to its rare meeting. "They will pass soon," Nira said softly. Mark nodded. "And so will the asteroids." She looked at him, her gaze steady. "We will be ready." The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Crew members secured loose equipment, reinforced vital systems, and checked emergency shelters. Mark and Nira remained in the control room, monitoring the asteroid cluster's progress. The readings changed constantly, but Nira's eyes seemed to see the future path of each fragment before the sensors confirmed it. By the time the cluster entered close range, the crew was as ready as they could be. The shields were at full strength, their angles adjusted to deflect the largest fragments. When the warning alarms finally sounded, the station's atmosphere shifted instantly. The calm hum of routine life was replaced by tense voices, rushing footsteps, and the deep vibration of the shields powering up to maximum. In the control room, Mark sat at the main console, Nira beside him. The displays showed dozens of glowing dots approaching fast. "First contact in 20 seconds, Mark said. The station trembled as the first fragments struck the shields. A deep rumble rolled through the hull. Lights flickered briefly before steadying again. Nira's eyes stayed, fixed on the readings. "The large one will strike the forward shield in 40 seconds. Angle it 2 degrees to deflect." Mark entered the change, and the forward shield shimmered brightly as the asteroid hit, glancing off into space instead of piercing the barrier. More impacts followed, some small, some heavy enough to shake the station like a living thing. Each time a dangerous fragment approached, Nira gave precise instructions. Mark carried them out without question. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, the main wave of fragments passed. Smaller pieces continued to strike, but they were no longer a threat. The shields held, and the station remained intact. The commander's voice came over the intercom. "All sections report. Minimal damage." "Well done, everyone." Mark leaned back in his chair, feeling the tightness in his chest ease. He turned to Nira. "You saved us." Her expression was calm, but her eyes held a quiet warmth. "We saved us," she said. Later, when the station had returned to a quieter state, Mark and Nira went to the observation deck. The triad still shone in the distance, almost perfectly aligned now. "You were incredible," Mark said softly. Nira looked out at the stars. "I only did what I know, but I am glad I was here to do it." Mark watched her in the soft starlight. He felt the words he had been holding inside pressing at the edge of his thoughts, but he still kept them unspoken. For now it was enough to stand beside her, knowing they had faced danger together and come through it side by side. The triad glimmered above them, its slow meeting nearly complete. Soon, Mark knew, the rare moment Nira had been waiting for would arrive. And when it did, he wanted to be there with her. The asteroid storm had passed, but the space station haven still felt tense in its quiet. The shields had taken the worst of the impacts, and the hull had survived without serious damage. Yet the memory of the shaking floors, flickering lights, and heavy thuds against the station's defenses still hung in the air. In the hours after the danger had passed, crew members moved through the corridors checking for damage. Engineers inspected the shield generators, while others tested life support systems. There was no real rest yet. The station needed to be sure it was safe. Mark had barely left the control room since the event. His body was tired, but his mind was still running through everything that had happened. He remembered each moment when Nira had given him precise instructions, each adjustment that had kept the station safe. He knew without her guidance, things might have ended very differently. When the station's systems finally showed all clear, Mark left the control room and made his way to the observation deck. The large viewing window was dark, except for the distant stars, and there she was, standing at the railing as if the asteroid storm had never happened. "You're still here," Mark said quietly as he stepped beside her. Nira turned her head, slightly. "And so are you." He gave a small smile. "I couldn't rest without coming here first." Her gaze returned to the stars. "The triad is almost ready, perhaps in the next few hours." Mark followed her eyes. The 3 bright points were closer than he had ever seen them. Soon they would form the rare alignment she had spoken of so often. They stood in silence for a moment, letting the stillness of the view replace the noise and chaos of the past day. Then Nira said, "You worked well during the storm." Mark shook his head. "I only followed your lead. You were the one who saved us." "You give me too much credit," she replied. "It was our teamwork that made the difference." Mark studied her profile in the soft light from the stars. "Still, I don't know how you stayed so calm. I could feel the whole station shaking, but you didn't hesitate once." Nira's eyes did not leave the stars. "When you have traveled far in the dark, you learn not to fear every shadow. The danger is real, yes, but fear will not protect you. Action will." Mark let her words sink in. "I think I'm starting to understand you a little more." She looked at him now, her violet eyes holding a steady warmth. "Perhaps you are." They stayed together as the station settled into the quiet of the night cycle. A few other crew members came and went, glancing briefly at the view before moving on. But Mark and Nira remained, watching the slow approach of the Triad's perfect alignment. Mark thought about everything they had been through since meeting. The first time he had seen her standing here, the long talks about her world, the music they had shared, the lessons about the stars, and now the danger they had faced together. There was something different about tonight. The silence between them was not just comfortable, it was full of unspoken meaning. Nira's hand rested lightly on the railing, only a short distance from his. Without thinking, Mark's hand moved closer. Their fingers brushed, and for a moment neither of them pulled away. It was a small thing, yet it felt like the entire room had shifted. Nira's gaze stayed on the Triad. "It is almost time," she said softly. When the moment came, it happened without fanfare. The three stars slid into perfect alignment, their combined light shining with a clarity that seemed to make the rest of the sky dim. It was not a dramatic burst, but a gentle, perfect meeting, just as Nira had described. "This is it," she said. Mark looked at the Triad, but he also looked at her. The starlight reflected in her eyes, making them seem deeper and more alive than ever. "What does it mean to your people?" he asked quietly. "It means that even after great distances and long separations, there can still be a meeting," she said. "It is a sign of hope, a reminder that the universe is wide but not endless. Paths can cross again." Mark thought about the meaning behind her words. He wondered if she was speaking only of the stars, or if she was speaking of something between them as well. For a long while, they simply stood there watching. The Triad would not stay aligned for long, but the moment itself felt timeless. "You've been waiting for this since you came aboard," Mark said. "Yes," she replied. "And now I have seen it." "Was it what you hoped?" Her eyes softened. "More, because I did not see it alone." Mark felt something tighten in his chest at her words. He wanted to speak, to tell her everything he had been holding back, but the right words still would not come. Instead, he said, "I'm glad I was here for it." She gave a small nod. "And I am glad you stayed." After the alignment began to fade, they continued to watch the stars in comfortable silence. The asteroid storm already felt like a distant memory, though both knew how close the danger had been. Eventually, Nira said, "Do you know why I first noticed you watching me?" Mark smiled faintly. "Because I was doing a terrible job of hiding it?" "Perhaps," she said with the smallest hint of amusement. "But also because few people watch for long. Most glance once and then look away." "You did not look away." Mark met her gaze. "Maybe I didn't want to." They held each other's eyes for a moment before Nira looked back to the stars. The night cycle passed, and the station moved on its steady path through the quiet void. But for Mark, something had changed. The bond he felt with Nira was no longer, just growing. It was solid, like the alignment they had just witnessed. Whatever came next, he knew he would face it standing beside her. They had already faced the darkness together once, and they had found light in it. The space station haven drifted quietly through the endless dark of space. The rare event of the Triad's perfect alignment had passed, leaving behind a calm that felt both peaceful and full of promise. Mark stood once again at the observation deck, gazing out at the stars. He felt the steady beat of the station beneath his feet, the hum of machines around him. But his thoughts were far away, on Nira, and the journey they had shared. She appeared beside him, moving with quiet grace. Her violet eyes held the light of distant galaxies, and her presence brought a calm warmth to the room. "Mark," she said softly, "the alignment is over." He nodded. "Yes, but it feels like something new is beginning." Nira looked at him closely. "Do you want to tell me what you feel?" Mark hesitated. The words were still tangled in his heart, hidden beneath layers of fear and hope. He had watched her for so long, felt so deeply, yet he had not found the courage to say it. He began. Nira reached out and gently took his hand. Her touch was light but steady. "It is okay," she said. "You do not need to speak if you are not ready." Mark looked down at their hands, then back up into her eyes. "I have been afraid," he said quietly. "Afraid that if I speak, I might lose what we have." She smiled softly. "Sometimes silence says more than words." For a long time they stood there, their hands joined, sharing the quiet without needing to fill it. Days passed, and the routines of the station returned. But Mark and Nira's bond had changed. It was deeper now, built on trust and understanding. They continued to share stories, music, and starlight. One evening, as the station rotated to face a distant nebula, Mark invited Nira to his quarters. It was a small room filled with simple things: a telescope, some books, and a small music player. He set the music player on the table and pressed play. A soft melody filled the room. Nira closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. When the song ended, she opened her eyes and looked at Mark. "This music, it is like a bridge," she said, "between your world and mine." Mark smiled. "I want us to build more bridges, between us and between our worlds." Nira reached out, touching his cheek gently. "I want that too." The days turned into weeks, and the space station haven continued its silent voyage. Mark and Nira became inseparable, not because of grand gestures, but because of small moments, shared glances, quiet talks, and the comfort of presence. One afternoon, while watching a distant planet through the telescope, Mark asked, "Do you think your people will ever visit us again?" Nira smiled. "I believe they will. And perhaps your people will visit Vera too." "Do you think that will happen soon?" "Not soon," she said, "but when the time is right." Mark nodded. "I want to believe that." One evening, as the station orbited a bright star, Mark and Nira stood on the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly before them, familiar and new all at once. Nira spoke softly. "When I first came here, I was alone and afraid. But now I feel that I belong, not just to Vera or to the station, but to this moment and to you." Mark looked at her, his heart full. "I have felt the same." She reached for his hand again. "Maybe words are not always needed. Sometimes what we feel is enough." Mark squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, enough." The space between stars was vast, but in that quiet room on the station, Mark and Nira found a universe of their own. One built on trust, hope, and a love that needed no words to be understood. And as the stars continued their endless dance, they stood together, watching, waiting, and knowing that whatever came next, they would face it side by side.